Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another tier list video. The release of Dawn of the Z Legends is right around the corner. I hope you guys all had a really good pre-release if you were able to make it to one. But since we are just a week away from the actual set and new mechanic release, I figured we would do a tier list of the new archetypes. We have 14 different leaders here to cover, if I'm not mistaken. So we are going to rank these in the order you see listed here. We have tier 1, tier 1.5, tier 2, rogue, and trash. A little bit of different ordering than what I've done in the past. What I'm going to kind of do is this. So I'm going to take each strategy and each archetype, give my thoughts on it from playtesting it. I have playtested the majority of the things listed here pretty extensively, and I'm going to give my thoughts on it comparative to what is coming out of Ultimate Squad format, because we all know that we didn't really get a ban list coming out of Ultimate Squad. So there's no real reason to think that anything from Ultimate Squad inherently gets weaker unless something comes out in Z Legends that automatically counters it or something like that, right? So we're going to place these things into the tiers. We're going to consider the better decks in those colors already, compare them to that. So I will be doing that in today's video. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, tons of ways down in the description to do so. But if you want to buy or pre-order any Dragon Ball Super cards or any training cards that matter, feel free to use my link in the description to TCG Player. It really does help out. Now, real quick, let's go through more of a, I guess, a definition of each tier. So tier 1, just the best decks you could possibly be playing. If you want to win a tournament, if you want to top, you want to go far in a tournament, you want to be playing a tier 1 deck. 1.5, it's just on the cusp of tier 1. They're a little bit weaker. Either people don't play them as frequently, but if they do and dedicate a lot of time to them, they can be very, very strong decks. But these are decks you're not going to see as commonly, and maybe they just lack a little bit of power compared to tier 1. Tier 2, you really got to dedicate a lot of time to these decks, and that's also going to be the same as Rogue tier, but tier 2 have some, kind of meta-worthy qualities going for them. It's not a total shock to see a tier 2 deck make top cut. Rogue, though, these are the Invokers of the world, a deck you would never ever expect to see in top cut, but if you're a player that dedicates your entire time to it, you might see these decks perform pretty well. And then trash tier, just not worth playing besides more of a casual level. So let's get started. We are going to go with blue first. So firstly, we're talking about Trunks Ramp. So my opinion of Trunks Ramp, I talked about this actually in a recent Patreon article, but I'll kind of rehash here. This deck has been so weird to build and play. There are actually many ways you can go about building Trunks Ramp, because you have temporary ramp that's free, you have permanent ramp but it costs energy, you can do these really convoluted combos to make the temporary ramp permanent. It's really weird, really hard to play, and every single time I feel like I have a version of Trunks Ramp ironed out, I realize that a different blue deck just does it better. So I think the leader does have some powerful stuff going for it. I do think the Vegito Z battle card is also a very strong card, and I think blue is looking good in the upcoming format because it counters one of the most degenerate strategies we've seen in a long time, which we'll get to later. So even though I just kind of dumped on Trunks a lot, I'm going to throw it in Rogue tier for now, because again, I think blue is very well positioned. I think there are many blue decks that happen to fall above Ramp Trunks. That's why I'm leaving it down here in Rogue, but I do think players dedicate the time to it may be able to find success if the perfect build is discovered. Next up, let's talk about this Reboot Goku leader. This is like the first leader that ever came out in the game, if I'm not mistaken. So basically what he does is you're able to get different effects based on the number of energy that you have. And if you guys remember, there's a Beerus that came out for this deck. You pay 1, you draw a card, you put it in your energy in rest mode, but that card can never restand, not even during your charge phase. This leader and this deck is so weird to play because you're actually not playing a blue ramp deck unless you resolve Zeno Super combo, but that's very, very conditional and not always going to happen depending on what matchups you're playing. So in the matchups where you can't turn that Beerus into a permanent ramp, you're playing a regular degular blue deck, and it's honestly pretty unimpressive. Like, the main thing about this leader is that he can turn energy requirements to your advantage. So Kale, for example, Kale 5-drop, you have to have 7 or more energy to wipe the board, so you can get to that earlier in this deck. There's a Janemba Infernal Intruder. You have to have 3 more energy to play it for 1. It's a 20k crit body, so you can do that technically on turn 2. There's some pretty cool things you can do with this leader, but that energy just sitting in your energy pool tapped, again, unless you have the appropriate means of turning it into a permanent ramp, it's just way too slow, way too clunky, and for that reason, I'm personally throwing it in trash tier. I could see maybe slower formats this being better, because the tapped energy sitting in your pool is going to be okay, but as it is right now, I think it's not going to be great in the upcoming format, in my opinion. But what might be one to look out for down the road if it gets more support. Next up, we're talking about Halo Goku. This is one that I've really been enjoying playing. This might be my favorite deck from the set, purely based on how it plays and how interesting it is. I'm going to go ahead and throw Halo Goku into tier 2. I do really like the deck. I think it's very, very good at setting up Z energy and using the Z deck, but I can't in good faith say it's going to be better than either Blue Baby, Gamma, or SS4 Vegeta Ramp. I just don't believe that, which is why I'm putting this in tier 2. Those 3 decks would fill up tier 1 and 1.5 depending on how you want to rank them, but this deck is very good. The main problem with it, to be honest with you, is that if you don't hit the North Kai at cheering something, if you don't hit the main 1-drop in your opening hand or hit it in your mulligan, you're not playing the game, and that's a big problem. Bubbles, the tournament pack card Bubbles, I thought would kind of help fix that problem, but it's not a direct deck search, it's only top 5, so you're still kind of in a rough spot, because if you whiff all that top 5, yeah, you send 1 Halo to the drop, but you need to get awakened by turn 2 for this deck to properly function. The other problem too is, like, let's say you open North Kai and you only have 1 or 2 other Budokai cards in your opening hand, because you got to play some number of just good blue cards. So that runs into another problem where now you might not be able to resolve the leader's unawakened effect, and you're not cycling through your deck, you're not setting up your drop area manipulation for your Halos. You run into an issue there. That can be a really big problem. The next archetype we have to talk about is Blue Pycon. We got a Blue Pycon deck, I think it was set 11 or set 12, and it ended up doing nothing within the grand scheme of the meta, never even really given much of a thought. The only cool thing about Pycon in the past has been you kind of get to stack the top of your deck and set up your draws, kind of filter dead cards to the bottom. And this Pycon deck does some similar stuff, and the Z leader is actually really strong, but the main deck, 1, is just way too gimmicky, and 2, it's not doing anything that really impresses you, especially again when compared to the meta blue decks of Gamma, SS4 Ramp, and Baby. I mean, Budokai Goku barely scratches the surface of actually having strong boss monsters, but has real big consistency issues. Pycon, not really overly impressive with anything it does, so I am going to throw this one in the trash tier, in my opinion. Now we move on to the color red. Alright, so let's start with SS4 Gogeta, because I think this kind of sets the precedence for the rest of the red decks here. SS4 Gogeta is getting one of the strongest boss monsters we've ever seen in Dragon Ball Super ever since Super Saiyan Gogeta Hero Revived. The 8-drop Gogeta GT in this deck is, for all intents and purposes, uninteractable unless you can play a very few select amount of cards that actually put a restriction on the opponent themselves, not even on the card. The opponent is less powerful as an autonomous person than the actual 8-drop is in the deck. It's kind of insane. So cards like Dirty Burst, cards like Shin, Royal Supremacy, or Noble Supremacy are some of your only outs to the actual 8-drop. And besides the 8-drop, the deck draws an insane amount of cards. Like, it is actually absurd, because almost every single card in the deck is a raw +1. That's an insane fact. And the deck can also be very aggressive. Not quite on the same levels of aggression as like U7 Goku, for example, because you got to kind of sometimes invest 2 energy into a threat if you don't have your unison established. And even if you do have your unison established, you're spending energy on the unison for 2. So you're not quite as aggressive as U7 that just plays threats for 1 energy. And even Sin does the same thing. But regardless of that, even though it is slightly less aggressive, it draws the most ridiculous hand I've seen in a red deck. And the boss monster is absolutely insane. So this is going up at an easy tier 1 for me. I am not going to be surprised if this turned out to be the best red deck for the beginning of Dawn of the Z Legends. Things can always change. Metas always evolve and adapt. But I do think this is going to be the best red deck going into the new format. Next up, let's talk about Red Sin Shenron. So this is a deck that many people agree has been overshadowed because of how insane SS4 Gogeta looks, and I do totally agree. I do think Red Sin is a super solid deck. Do I think it matches up particularly well in SS4 Gogeta? Sort of if you go first, not really a chance if you go second. And honestly, I think that's a big problem for a lot of the red mirrors, even U7, which again, I think is going to be a good deck coming off of Ultimate Squad format. It doesn't get hit in any particular way, and the red Z deck is a very powerful one, and U7 is plenty good at comboing and setting up Z energy. So while I do think that there are kind of like 4 red decks that'll be in rotation for the meta, U7, Sin, Gogeta, and even Pan, I do think is pretty solid. I think Gogeta sits above the rest, so I'm going to throw Sin into 1.5. Not 100% convinced yet that it's just like automatically better than U7, so If that turns out to be the case, I could see Sin bumping up to a lower spot in tier 1, but for Sin, I'm going to go into 1.5 for now. Red Pan. What they did with this leader was really cool in terms of a reboot, because this leader has just gotten tons of value 1-drops thrown at it. Like, every battle card in the deck reads absolutely insane until you play the SS4 Gogeta matchup, and then you see you're playing on like an entire different echelon. Like, the SS4 leader just has a book of text attached to it. Pan is very simple. You play things, they get more power, you draw cards. And yes, SS4 Goku, Defender of Life, is the most insane 3-cost battle card you've ever seen in this game in the Pan deck. That is the one main thing the deck has going for it, but again, like, it just kind of fails in comparison to SS4 Gogeta. I think your U7 matchup and your Sin matchup are very fine. I think red mirrors outside of SS4 Gogeta are actually going to be quite skill intensive, because you need to know how your red opponent can aggress you and what the answers to their aggression are and how to most efficiently defend that. I think that's going to be a very skill intensive mirror for those 3 red decks to play. I think Pan is very good. I'm not even honestly sure if I'm willing to put it in 1.5, possibly tier 2. This is one that I think people have to dedicate a lot more time to, because it's a much simpler leader and strategy. But I mean, I could honestly see SS4 Defender of Life carrying this into 1.5, but I think for now I'm gonna put Pan at the top of tier 2, and I could maybe see that changing to 1.5 by the end of this. But let's go into the yellow Goku Ape. All right, the Reboot Goku leader. This one has gotten a lot of people's attention for good reason. A lot of the cards read very insane, the leader exceptionally, because you search top 10, you find your awakening pieces, you find your consistency pieces. The Z leader is even nothing to scoff at. I think this leader is super good. We have to remember that Trunks Vegeta is coming out of Ultimate Squad format completely unscathed. So how does this stack up against that deck? Well, I think you have a couple comparisons. One, I think that this Goku Ape deck can actually be a bit more aggressive. 2, I think that it plays a lot more barrier battle cards, so your board's a little stickier. But I do have to say that one issue of the Goku Ape deck is that you don't really have access to barrier removal nearly as easily as Yellow Trunks does. So that's going to be a somewhat big issue, because Trunks being able to kill barrier battle cards has always been a big thing the deck had going for it. Both decks have an inherent double strike win condition with the leader, albeit Goku Ape has to Z Awaken in order to meet that. But I do think this is going to be a yellow deck that can rival Yellow Trunks perfectly fine. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into tier 1. I can see it maybe drop into 1.5, but I do think it's going to be a very popular deck. I think a lot of people are going to play it because of how easy it is to build out of a structure deck, and it's just yellow. It's just going to be very good in the hands of solid players. Piccolo Superhero. We're talking about this one next. So on this list, this may be the deck I have the second least most experience with. I have played it a fair amount, but I honestly put it down because in a lot of matchups, it's unfortunately very unimpressive. And the problem with a leader like Piccolo, like there have been leaders like this in the past where you have like Cell Surge, you have like the blue Hurrigan leader from like whatever it was, set 14 or something. These leaders that give you very selective search power, which is very powerful in a way, but it comes at the cost of your hand size. You have to pitch cards in order to selectively search whatever it is you want. And these decks do not generate the same hand sizes as many other decks that even +2 cards per turn typically. And while it is a really cool thing to be able to selectively search out whatever card you want off top 5, you're going to struggle a lot against these very powerful red decks coming out, because they're hitting you fast. They don't give you time to set up, so your selective search doesn't really mean as much when you don't have the cards in your hand to defend yourself. Another big problem with Piccolo is that your boss monster does not fully come online until turn 4, and if you go second against these red decks or these aggressive green decks even, you could be in for a world of hurt. So I do personally think Piccolo Superhero probably going to go into Rogue tier. I think people will dedicate their time to it because it is a deck that revolves around the superhero movie. A lot of people were really big fans of that movie, myself included, but I don't think this deck has the power level yet to really do all that much in the meta. But it is a deck based on a popular movie, so definitely expect to get more support in the future. Then we have Bardock Crew. So I am going to throw Bardock Crew into 1.5. This is a very unique yellow deck from what I've seen, because it's a more spammy, aggressive yellow deck. It's almost like they took the spirit of Bardock the Progenitor and said, hey, let's make an aggressive Bardock deck, because this yellow deck spams more battle cards than I've seen in a long time, which is a very unique and cool thing the deck has going for it. I also very much like the fact that it has a very strong Z leader. I think one of the problems with Bardock, though, is that you have to play so many crew cards in your deck. You have to cut down on a lot of the yellow staples. I do think that kind of makes the deck a little bit harder to play and build, but I still think it's very powerful. I think the Swarmy aspect's very good. It's got plenty of removal, negate skills and remove, so you get around things like Indestructible or other various annoying permanents. So I do think the deck is very good. I think it's a little bit below SS Yellow Trunks, in my opinion, and Yellow Goku Ape, but I do think it's still a fine yellow deck. Now let's get into green. Gotenks Reboot. I profiled this deck on the channel recently. I have enjoyed playing it. I think it's good. I think there are players out there who are going to dedicate their time to Gotenks, but I think Gotenks' biggest problem is consistency, unfortunately. You need to open with very, very specific hands to have a successful game, and unfortunately, when you need to open 3 to 4 specific cards, you're asking for quite a lot, even with a full mulligan. So my opinion, Gotenks going to go into Rogue, not going to be green savior all on its own, but I do think it is a fine deck if you want to dedicate time to it and kind of find that perfect build. Then we have Master Roshi. So this is a really, really interesting one because coming out of Dawn of the Z Legends, the Goku Piccolo Faded Rivals combo is one of the most powerful combos we've seen, especially in the color green, for a long, long time. Having the ability to kill anything ignoring barrier and having the ability to snipe a unison, basically for all of its markers in one fell swoop is a very, very powerful thing. We need to find the green deck that can facilitate Z energy the easiest, and Roshi is really the only green leader that has a combo centric effect, and it's still not even that easy to pull off. So I think Roshi's success is going to be very tied to how good or bad Faded Rivals is in a given format. I think if we fall back to the sort of like controlling meta like we kind of are in Ultimate Squad, where blue is very powerful and yellow is very powerful, I think Roshi can rise in and do some things. But while red decks are playing very cheap unisons and hitting you very fast, I don't see Roshi having a very good time. So I am going to throw it in Rogue tier for now. But again, if the Faded Rivals combo becomes a cornerstone of the format, I can see Roshi doing some pretty cool things. Then we have Green King Piccolo, the descendant of the former Red King Piccolo deck. You can tell if you play this deck, they tried to basically reprint Red KP, but just in a more fair fashion. So I personally think this is going to be the best green deck, purely because of how aggressive and how similar to Red KP it is. I think it's going to be very good, hit very fast. I think it's even a little bit less glass cannon-like than Red KP is after all the hits, because you have access to Dorm Potential Unleashed, you have access to Charismatic Villain, which in a lot of cases is just better than Yamcha counterplay, and you still have Unison that draws cards so you can hit those fat hands, and you have essentially an unbanned piano. So I'm honestly going to be a little bit bold here and throw KP into 1.5, because I do think it's going to be the best green deck on the market. I think it's going to be a very aggressive deck, and I do think we're kind of rolling into this aggro format. Do I think it can beat the likes of SS4 Gogeta and Red Sin? I think they are probably better aggressive decks, but I do think KP is going to be the best green deck we've seen in a while, even coming off the legs of Cell Reboot and Cooler, which are fine decks, but I think KP just kind of has them a little bit outclassed. And then Shroom and Salsa. Unfortunately, this one has not impressed me. I thought it could maybe do some cool things with the ability to combo multiple cards per turn, multiple 10Ks per turn even, and the new SR is also intriguing, but this deck is just still very gimmicky. I mean, lots of Servant, lots of Overlord that has always been a more weak keyword skill in the game. So for now, I'm throwing the Shroom and Salsa Archetype into Rogue tier. Now keep in mind, mentally, you got to fill in the rest of this tier list with the other decks in the format. Again, that's Gamma, that's SS4, that's Baby, that's Yellow Trunks, that's U7. All these other very successful and popular decks from the previous format go into this tier list somewhere, but this is just a tier list consisting of the Z Legends archetypes and where I think they will fall with the rest of the stuff from Ultimate Squad. So definitely seems like a lot more of them sit in Rogue. I'm going to take a quick scan and see what I think about each of these different decks. SS4 Gogeta, I mean, undisputed tier 1. Everything between 1.5 can bounce up to tier 1 potentially. I can see Sin and Bardock bouncing up. I don't think KP bounces up though. KP might be the pinnacle of a 1.5 deck where it's a good aggro deck, it's the best green deck, but it's still not a better aggro deck than any of the other ones listed. Tier 2, I think Pan and Budokai Goku have some potential, but they have some limitations that kind of hold them back. These Rogue tier decks, I definitely agree that there's some potential there. I know I mentioned that Roshi will only kind of be good if the Faded Rivals combo is good, so maybe that puts it in trash tier for now even, and only bumps it up when that combo becomes relevant, but I think some people will dedicate time to this and maybe make it work in certain formats that are a bit more controlly. And then trash tier, these ones are just not competitively playable in my opinion, which is a sad thing to see because we've been let down with Pycon twice, and actually we've been let down by Shroom and Salsa twice as well, so that's unfortunate. But anyways, guys, I want in the comments below what you think. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.